When we start thinking about punishment in war, we have to ask ourselves who is going to be punished, and who is going to be punished for what. So let's begin with who is going to be punished for a decision to wage an unjust war, for example, a war of aggression. On a simple view, well, no one, because a war of aggression is an act carried out by a state, and we're not going to put a state on trial, on a criminal trial, because states do not act of their own volition. People act on behalf of the state. So we might say, well, if not the state, then the head of state. If we want to take the view that the head of state and only the head of state ought to be brought to trial, well, then we are committing ourselves to the view that as soon as Hitler committed suicide on the 30th of April 1945, then that was it. There was no one else amongst the Nazi leadership who could be brought to trial. And that seems very controversial, indeed unpalatable, simply because so many of those people played a crucially important part in the various wars of aggression which Nazi Germany carried out. So we have a third view. People other than the head of state can be brought to trial for the crime of aggression. But who are those people? Nuremberg trial is relatively easy because the people who were put on trial were very high-ranking Nazi leaders. But of course, those people would not have been able to mount a campaign of aggression against Poland, Belgium, France, and so on and so forth, unless hundreds, indeed thousands, indeed dozens of thousands of individuals had been willing, at least induced, in some cases coerced, to do their bidding. On the view that I put forward, soldiers who kill enemy soldiers in pursuit of an unjust aggression are answerable to a charge of murder. When we start thinking about the possibility of bringing thousands of ordinary rank-and-file soldiers into trial for their participation in the crime of aggression, the mind begins to boggle. But of course, in war, we do in fact contemplate that possibility of bringing individual actors, rank-and-file actors, into trial. And that's the very category of war crimes, or indeed crimes against humanity. So when individual member of a platoon starts killing innocent civilians, in law we will deem this particular act to be a war crime. So the idea of individual responsibility for acts of killing wrongfully committed in war is not as alien as we might think when we first contemplate bringing to trial individual soldiers who kill in pursuit of an unjust aggression. Some people will take the view that there is something different about the military, in particular, and war in general, which is that soldiers act within a chain of command and are given certain orders by their commanding officers, which they are under a prima facie duty to obey. Since Nuremberg, the "I was ordered to do so" defense no longer is taken seriously by courts. It will provide an excuse only if it is coupled with the threat of very severe penalties for refusing to disobey. Then we should reach very similar conclusions in non-war cases. If one of Don Corleone's henchmen had said to a court, "If I had disobeyed the Godfather's order, the Godfather would have had me killed," we, that is to say domestic jurisdictions, would certainly not have regarded that as a justification for killing. My point is that it should. My point, in other words, is that the very same considerations which lead us, or should lead us, to find excuses for soldiers wrongfully killing in war also apply for civilians wrongfully killing in garden variety cases of violence. We tend to be much more lenient towards soldiers on account of the specific circumstances under which they operate than we are towards domestic wrongdoers. It may be that the circumstances of war are such that we are at least sometimes justified in being more lenient, but by parity of reasoning, sometimes the circumstances under which domestic criminals operate are very closely similar to those under which soldiers operate. I mean, I'm thinking of drug-related gang warfare, for example, in many parts of the world. And so, on my view, we should be similarly lenient towards those domestic criminal wrongdoers So my whole approach to war, by which I mean to the ethics of killing in war and to the ethics of punishing after war, is based on the idea that national stroke political borders are irrelevant to individuals' basic entitlements in general and their right not to be killed, in particular. The origin, if you will, of the violence should be regarded as completely irrelevant to our response to those rights violations.